What would you do if corrupt police officers killed your daughter's beloved dog right in front of her eyes? What if those same officers laughed about it, thinking they were untouchable? And what if they had no idea that the little girl's father was one of the most lethal operators in Delta Force history? This is the true story of Colonel James "Ghost" Mercer, a decorated Delta Force commander who had survived the most dangerous missions in the world's deadliest war zones. He'd taken down terrorists, rescued hostages, and served his country with honor for 20 years. But nothing prepared him for the battle he'd have to fight on American soil when corrupt cops in his own hometown committed an act so heinous it would shake an entire police department to its core. What started as a routine evening in the quiet town of Oak Ridge, North Carolina, turned into a nightmare that would test everything James believed about justice, the law, and how far a father would go to protect his daughter and honor a fallen hero. This story has corruption, injustice, a father's rage, and ultimately, a reckoning that no one saw coming. But most importantly, it's about how one man used his training, his discipline, and the very system that failed him to bring down those who thought they were above the law. Before we begin, if you love stories about justice, accountability, and standing up against corruption, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell. And if this story moves you, leave a comment telling us about a time you stood up for what was right, even when it was difficult. Now let me take you back to where it all began, on a warm September evening that would change everything. Colonel James Mercer, 42, had recently returned from his final deployment overseas. After 20 years in special operations, including 12 years with the elite Delta Force, he'd decided it was time to retire and focus on what mattered most: his family. James was the kind of man who commanded respect without saying a word. 6 feet tall, built like a tactical weapon himself, with close-cropped dark hair showing streaks of gray at the temples. His eyes were a sharp, observant gray, the kind of eyes that missed nothing. He had the controlled movements of someone who'd spent decades in life-or-death situations, but around his daughter, those hard edges softened. His daughter Sophie was 10 years old, with her mother's blonde hair and her father's determined spirit. James's wife, Rachel, had died from cancer 3 years earlier, a battle James couldn't fight for her, a war he couldn't win. It had devastated both father and daughter, but they'd found solace in each other and in a 4-legged companion who'd helped them heal. That companion was Rex, not a military dog, but a retired police K9, a Belgian Malinois who'd served 8 years with the North Carolina State Police before a leg injury had forced his early retirement. James had adopted Rex 2 years ago through a K9 retirement program, and the dog had become Sophie's best friend and constant companion. Rex slept at the foot of Sophie's bed every night. He walked her to the school bus stop every morning. He played fetch with her in the backyard every afternoon. For a little girl who'd lost her mother too young, Rex was more than a pet. He was family, a guardian, a source of unconditional love in a world that had taken so much from her. James had settled in Oak Ridge, a small town about 40 miles outside of Fort Bragg, where he'd been stationed for most of his career. It was supposed to be quiet, safe, the perfect place to raise Sophie and start their new chapter together. He'd bought a modest house with a big backyard, enrolled Sophie in the local elementary school, and began the difficult transition from soldier to civilian. But James Mercer was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous enemies aren't in foreign countries. Sometimes they wear badges in your own hometown. September 15th started like any other evening. James was in the garage organizing his tools, trying to embrace this new domestic life. Sophie came running in, her face bright with excitement. "Dad, can I take Rex for a walk? Please, just around the block?" James looked at his watch. It was 6:30 p.m., still plenty of light outside. Oak Ridge was a safe neighborhood, or so he thought. Sophie was responsible, and Rex was trained and protective. "Stay on our street," James said, the same instructions he always gave. "Don't talk to strangers, and be back in 20 minutes. I will. Come on, Rex. Sophie clipped the leash onto Rex's collar, and the dog's tail wagged with excitement. James watched from the garage as his daughter and the dog headed down the driveway, Sophie skipping, Rex trotting proudly beside her. It was the last moment of peace James Mercer would know for a very long time. 20 minutes passed, then 25. James felt the first prickle of concern, the same instinct that had kept him alive through countless operations. He walked to the front of the house, looking down the tree-lined street. 30 minutes. Something was wrong. James's training kicked in immediately. He grabbed his phone and started jogging down the street in the direction Sophie had gone. As he rounded the corner onto Oak Street, he heard something that made his blood run cold, his daughter screaming. "Rex! No! Don't hurt him! Daddy! Daddy!" James broke into a full sprint, his heart pounding. He rounded another corner and saw a scene that would be burned into his memory forever. 2 police officers had Sophie backed against a fence. Rex was on the ground, bleeding from his side, still trying to crawl towards Sophie despite his injuries. And standing over the dog with his service weapon still drawn was Officer Derek Hutchins, a smirk on his face. "Please!" Sophie was sobbing, trying to reach Rex, but the other officer, Officer Mike Torres, was holding her back. "You shot him! Why did you shoot him?" James covered the distance in seconds. "Sophie!" The officers spun around and James immediately assessed the situation with his trained eye. Rex was badly wounded but alive. Sophie was terrified but unharmed. And these 2 officers looked surprised, then annoyed at his arrival. James dropped to his knees beside Rex, his hands immediately finding the gunshot wound. The bullet had entered Rex's side, and blood was pooling on the pavement. The dog whimpered, trying to lick Sophie's hand. "What the hell happened here?" James's voice was deadly calm. The kind of calm that his Delta Force teammates would have recognized as far more dangerous than shouting. Officer Hutchins holstered his weapon with exaggerated casualness. "Dog was aggressive, came at us, had to neutralize the threat." "Neutralize?" James looked up, his gray eyes like ice. "This is a retired police K-9. He's trained. What did you do to provoke him?" "We don't have to explain ourselves to you," Torres said, finally releasing Sophie, who immediately threw herself down beside Rex, cradling the dog's head. "The hell you don't." James pulled out his phone. "I'm calling 911. This dog needs a veterinarian now." "Put the phone away," Hutchins said, his hand moving to his weapon again. "We've already called it in. Animal control is on the way." "Animal control?" James stood slowly, positioning himself between the officers and his daughter. Every muscle in his body was coiled, ready. He knew he could disarm both officers in less than 3 seconds, but Sophie was watching, traumatized, and he wouldn't make this worse. Not yet. "This dog needs emergency medical care." "It's just a dog, buddy," Hutchins said with a shrug. "Probably better to put it down anyway. Saved you the vet bill." James felt something snap inside him. In 20 years of combat, facing down terrorists and warlords, he'd never felt the kind of rage that flooded through him at that moment. This casual cruelty, this complete disregard for his daughter's pain, for Rex's service, for basic decency, it was worse than anything he'd encountered in a war zone. But his training held. He didn't move, didn't strike. Instead, he pulled out his phone again and hit record, pointing it at both officers. "State your names and badge numbers, now." "Turn that off," Torres said, stepping forward. "You're being recorded on a public street, which is my constitutional right. Names and badge numbers. Or should I file my complaint without them?" The officers exchanged glances. Hutchins stepped forward, his face twisted with contempt. "Derek Hutchins, badge 847. And before you go crying to anyone, you should know that the chief is my uncle. So good luck with that complaint, tough guy." Mike Torres, badge 923, the other officer added. And just so you know, your dog attacked us. That's our story, and that's what's going in our report. Your word against ours, and guess whose word matters more? James said nothing, just kept recording as the officers swaggered back to their patrol car and drove away, leaving a devastated little girl, a dying dog, and a father whose faith in the system he'd served was shattering in real time. James scooped Rex into his arms. The dog must have weighed 70 pounds, but James barely noticed. Sophie, run ahead to the house. Get in the truck. Now! They rushed to the nearest emergency veterinary clinic, James pushing every speed limit, Sophie in the back seat with Rex's head in her lap, crying and whispering, "You're going to be okay. You're going to be okay." At the clinic, the staff rushed Rex into surgery. The bullet had missed his vital organs but had caused significant internal bleeding. The surgery took 3 hours. 3 hours of James pacing the waiting room, holding his sobbing daughter, his mind already working through scenarios, plans, consequences. His phone rang. It was his former commanding officer, General Robert Clayton, now retired but still one of James's closest friends and mentors. "Jim, I heard through the grapevine that you had an incident with local PD. You okay?" James stepped outside to take the call, watching through the window as Sophie sat clutching Rex's collar, her face pale and tear-stained. "They shot Sophie's dog, Rob, right in front of her. For no reason. And they think they're going to get away with it." There was a long pause. General Clayton knew James Mercer better than almost anyone. "What are you planning to do?" "I'm going to do it the right way. File a complaint. Go through channels. I'm not that person anymore, Rob. I'm a civilian now. I have a daughter to think about." "Good. That's good, Jim. But if you need anything, legal support, witnesses, anything, you call me. What they did is unconscionable." The vet finally emerged, looking exhausted. "Rex is going to make it. The surgery was successful, but he's going to need extensive recovery time, months, probably, and he may never have full mobility again." James felt his knees weaken with relief. "Thank you. Thank you so much." As Sophie hugged the vet, crying tears of relief now instead of grief, James stepped back outside and looked at the video he'd recorded on his phone. 2 officers, their badge numbers clearly stated, their contempt for his daughter's pain clearly visible. He'd said he was going to do this the right way, and he meant it. But James Mercer hadn't survived 20 years in Delta Force by underestimating his enemies. He knew corruption when he saw it. He knew cover-ups, knew how power protected power. If the system failed him, and he had a sinking feeling it would, James Mercer had other skills, skills he'd hoped never to use again on American soil. But for his daughter, for Rex, for justice itself, he would do whatever it took. The war was just beginning. The next morning, with Rex sedated and recovering at home and Sophie staying with her grandmother, James walked into the Oak Ridge Police Department to file a formal complaint. He'd dressed carefully. Khaki pants, a button-down shirt, his bearing military but not threatening. He brought copies of the video, medical records from the vet documenting Rex's injuries, and witness statements from neighbors who'd heard the commotion. The officer at the front desk looked bored. "Complaint about what?" "2 of your officers shot my daughter's dog last night without provocation. Officer Derek Hutchins, badge 847, and Officer Mike Torres, badge 923. I have video evidence and medical documentation." The officer's expression changed, not to concern or sympathy, but to something like recognition and annoyance. "I'll let you speak with the watch commander. Have a seat." James sat in the waiting area for over an hour. He recognized the tactic. Make him wait. Make him feel small. Hope he'll give up and leave. He'd used similar psychological tactics himself in interrogations overseas. He didn't move, didn't check his phone, just sat with the stillness that came from years of patience in hostile environments. Finally, a man emerged, Captain Bill Hutchins. The resemblance to Derek Hutchins was obvious. This was the uncle Derek had mentioned, the one who would protect him. "Mr. Mercer, I'm Captain Hutchins. I understand you have a complaint about an incident last night?" "Colonel Mercer," James corrected quietly. "U.S. Army, retired. And yes, I do." They went into a small interview room. James presented everything: the video, the medical records, the timeline. He spoke calmly, factually, like he was delivering an after-action report. Captain Hutchins watched the video, his face unreadable. When it finished, he leaned back in his chair. "Colonel, I understand you're upset. Anyone would be in your situation. But you have to understand the officer's perspective. They responded to a call about an aggressive dog in the neighborhood." "There was no call," James interrupted. "I checked. I have contacts at the 911 center." "No calls came in about a dog in our neighborhood last night." Captain Hutchins' jaw tightened. "Well, perhaps it was a radio call. Regardless, they encountered what they perceived as a threat. A retired police K-9 on a leash, walking with a 10-year-old girl, is not a threat. And even if the dog had been aggressive, which he wasn't, shooting him wasn't the only option. Your officers carry batons, pepper spray, tasers. They chose lethal force against a family pet in front of a child." "I'll review the incident," Hutchins said, standing abruptly. "But I have to tell you, Colonel, these officers have exemplary records. I'm sure there's an explanation." James stood as well, meeting the captain's eyes. "There's an explanation, all right. Your nephew and his partner are corrupt, cruel, or both. And I expect a full investigation." "We take all complaints seriously," Hutchins said, his tone making clear he took this complaint anything but seriously. "You'll hear from us within 30 days. 30 days. The standard bureaucratic delay. James had expected nothing less. As he left the police station, James made 2 calls. The first was to a lawyer recommended by General Clayton, Marcus Rivera, a former JAG officer who'd transitioned to civilian law and specialized in police misconduct cases. The second call was to someone from his past, someone with skills that existed in the gray areas between legal and necessary. 3 days later, Sophie came home from school in tears. Her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, had pulled James aside. Colonel Mercer, I need to tell you something. Some police officers came to the school today. They spoke with Sophie. They asked her questions about the incident with Rex, but they did it without notifying you first or having a school counselor present. I only found out because Sophie was upset afterward." James felt his blood pressure rising. "What did they say to her?" "According to Sophie, they told her that if she kept telling lies about police officers, she could get her daddy in trouble. They said sometimes kids remember things wrong, and it would be better for everyone if she said she didn't remember what happened." They'd threatened his 10-year-old daughter. James thanked Mrs. Patterson, took Sophie home, and held her while she cried. "I told the truth, Daddy. I promise I told the truth. Rex didn't do anything wrong. They're lying." "I know, sweetheart. I know." "And you did exactly right by telling the truth. Always tell the truth no matter what anyone says, okay?" That night, after Sophie finally fell asleep, with the recovering Rex on a special bed beside her, James sat in his study and made a decision. He'd tried the official route. He'd filed the complaint, followed procedures, done everything by the book. And they'd responded by intimidating his daughter. The gloves were coming off. James Mercer might have retired from Delta Force, but he hadn't forgotten how to run an operation. And this was going to be an operation. Precise, methodical, devastating. First, he called Marcus Rivera, his lawyer, and reported the witness intimidation. Rivera immediately filed additional complaints and sent a formal letter putting the Oak Ridge PD on notice that any further contact with Sophie without her guardian and legal counsel present would result in immediate legal action. Then James reached out to his network. 20 years in special operations meant connections everywhere. He contacted retired FBI agents, investigative journalists, civil rights organizations. He was building a team. But the most important call went to someone named Alex Chen, a former military intelligence specialist who now ran a private investigation firm. If there was dirt on Hutchins and Torres, Alex would find it. "Jim Mercer," Alex said when he answered. "Haven't heard from you in 5 years. Must be important. I need everything you can find on 2 Oak Ridge police officers, Derek Hutchins and Mike Torres. Service records, complaints, lawsuits, personal finances, social media, associates, everything." "What are we looking for?" "Patterns. Nobody shoots a dog in front of a kid for no reason. These guys are either sadistic or corrupt, probably both. I want to know if there are other victims. I'll have something for you in 48 hours. While Alex worked, James did his own reconnaissance. He drove past Hutchins' house, a large property in an expensive neighborhood, far beyond what a police officer's salary should afford. He documented Torres's new truck, his expensive watch, his regular visits to high-end bars. These weren't just bad cops, they were dirty cops, and James was going to prove it. 28 days after filing his complaint, James received a letter from the Oak Ridge Police Department. He knew what it would say before he opened it. "After a thorough internal investigation, we have determined that Officers Hutchins and Torres acted appropriately given the circumstances and perceived threat. The officers' use of force was within department policy. This case is closed. No disciplinary action will be taken." James sat at his kitchen table reading the letter 3 times. Sophie was at school. Rex was sleeping nearby, still limping, still traumatized by loud noises ever since the shooting. Marcus Rivera called an hour later. "I got a copy of their report. It's a whitewash, Jim. They didn't interview any witnesses except the 2 officers involved. They dismissed your video as showing only part of the incident. They claim the officers perceived Rex as a threat based on his aggressive posture and barking, which we both know is complete BS. What are our options? We can file a federal civil rights lawsuit. It'll take time, maybe 2 to 3 years to get to trial. We can also file complaints with the state's Law Enforcement Oversight Board, but honestly, those rarely result in real consequences. And we can go to the media, but that's a double-edged sword. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it makes things worse." James listened to all of it, his mind already racing ahead. "Do all of it. File everything. But I want you to hold off on going to the media for now." "Why?" "Because I'm still gathering evidence. And when we do go public, I want to bring down the whole house, not just 2 dirty cops." What Marcus didn't know, what James couldn't tell him, was that Alex Chen had come through. The investigator had found a pattern stretching back years. Derek Hutchins and Mike Torres were part of a small crew of corrupt officers who'd been shaking down drug dealers, skimming money from evidence, and using excessive force with impunity. They'd been protected by Captain Hutchins and by a police chief who valued loyalty over justice. There were other victims. A young black man who'd been beaten during a traffic stop. A homeless veteran whose dog had been killed similar to Rex. But nobody had believed him because he had no credibility. A shop owner who'd been intimidated into not pressing charges after officers stole from his register during an investigation. The system had failed all of them. But James Mercer had resources they didn't have. He had training, connections, and something else, the absolute certainty that he would not stop until justice was served. James called a meeting at his house. Around his dining room table sat Marcus Rivera, his lawyer, Alex Chen, his investigator, Sandra Willis, a journalist from a major newspaper, David Park, a former FBI agent now with a civil rights organization, and General Robert Clayton, who'd driven down from Virginia to offer support. "Here's what we have," Alex said, spreading documents across the table. 5 years of complaints against Hutchins and Torres, none resulting in discipline. Evidence of excessive force, theft, intimidation, financial records showing unexplained income, and testimony from 3 other victims willing to go on record if they're protected. Protected how? Sandra Willis asked. James spoke up. I've arranged for security. I have contacts from my military service who specialize in protection details. Anyone who testifies against these officers will have someone watching their back. General Clayton nodded approvingly. I've also contacted the State Attorney General's office. They have a public corruption unit. With this much evidence, they'll have to investigate. And I've drafted a comprehensive federal lawsuit, Marcus Rivera added. Not just against Hutchins and Torres, but against Captain Hutchins, the police chief, and the city itself for maintaining a pattern of corruption and violating civil rights. Sandra Willis leaned forward. When do you want to go public with this story? James looked around the table at these people who'd come together to help him, to fight for justice. Soon. But I need one more piece. I need to prove that Captain Hutchins actively covered up his nephew's crimes. Alex, can you get access to the internal investigation files? Alex smiled. I know someone in the department, someone who's sick of the corruption. They're willing to leak the files, but they need protection too. They'll have it, James promised. The meeting broke up with everyone having assignments. The plan was coming together. In 2 weeks, they would go public with everything. The evidence, the victims, the corruption, all of it. But James Mercer was about to learn that when you corner dangerous people, they become even more dangerous. 1 week before they were scheduled to go public, James picked Sophie up from school and found a note tucked under his windshield wiper. Back off, or your daughter has more to lose than a dog. James's vision went red. He immediately called Alex Chen and Marcus Rivera. They're threatening Sophie. All bets are off. We go public tomorrow. That night, after Sophie was asleep with 2 of James's former Delta Force teammates standing guard outside their house, James sat in his study and made one more call. General, I need a favor. A big one. The story broke like a bomb. Sandra Willis's article appeared on the front page of a major newspaper with the headline, Decorated Delta Force Commander Takes on Small-Town Police Corruption After Officers Kill Daughter's Dog. The article included everything. Rex's shooting, the video evidence, the cover-up, the pattern of corruption, the intimidation of witnesses, testimony from other victims. It named names. It included financial records showing unexplained wealth. It revealed that Captain Hutchins had systematically protected his nephew and other officers from accountability. Within hours, it was picked up nationally. News trucks descended on Oak Ridge. The police chief held a press conference trying to defend the department, but he was visibly rattled. The state attorney general announced a formal investigation. The FBI's Civil Rights Division opened its own inquiry. Derek Hutchins and Mike Torres were placed on administrative leave. Captain Hutchins was reassigned to desk duty pending review. The police union issued a statement calling the allegations unfounded attacks on hard-working officers, but even they seemed half-hearted. James did one interview with Sandra Willis on camera. Colonel Mercer, why did you decide to fight this battle? James looked directly into the camera. Because when my daughter watched those officers shoot her dog and then laugh about it, she learned that some people with power think they're above the law. I couldn't let that lesson stand. I spent 20 years defending this country. I'm not going to let corruption destroy it from within. And to anyone else out there who's been victimized by corrupt police officers and been too afraid to speak up, you're not alone. There are people who will fight for you. Don't give up. The interview went viral. Within days, dozens of other people came forward with stories about Hutchins, Torres, and other officers in the Oak Ridge PD. The flood of complaints was overwhelming. Marcus Rivera filed the federal lawsuit. The defendants tried to have it dismissed, claiming qualified immunity, but the judge let most of the claims proceed. This is highly unusual, Marcus told James. Federal judges are usually very deferential to police officers. But the evidence you gathered is so comprehensive, so damning, that even a conservative judge couldn't dismiss it. The discovery process was brutal. James and his team had to turn over everything, but so did the police department. And what came out in discovery was even worse than what they'd already uncovered. Hutchins and Torres had been involved in planting evidence. They'd stolen thousands of dollars from crime scenes. They'd beaten suspects and then charged them with resisting arrest to cover it up. And Captain Hutchins had known about all of it, covering for his nephew and other officers in exchange for their loyalty. The police chief resigned. Captain Hutchins was fired and faced criminal charges for obstruction of justice. Torres, faced with overwhelming evidence, accepted a plea deal. 5 years in prison in exchange for testimony against Hutchins. Derek Hutchins went to trial. James sat in the courtroom every single day, with Sophie beside him. Rex, now mostly recovered but with a permanent limp, was registered as Sophie's emotional support animal and lay at her feet. Hutchins's defense attorney tried to paint James as a vindictive man, using his military connections to destroy a police officer's career over a simple mistake. But the evidence was too strong. Other victims testified: the homeless veteran whose dog had been killed, the young man who'd been beaten, the shop owner who'd been robbed. One by one, they told their stories. Alex Chen testified about the financial irregularities and the pattern of corruption. Marcus Rivera presented the video evidence, the medical records, the inconsistencies in the police reports. And then Sophie testified. James had tried to shield her from this, but Marcus convinced him that her testimony was crucial. She's the most credible witness we have, and she deserves to be heard. Sophie, wearing a purple dress and holding Rex's leash tightly, took the stand. The prosecutor gently guided her through what happened. "Can you tell us what Officer Hutchins did after he shot Rex?" Sophie's voice was small but clear. "He laughed. He said Rex was just a dog and that we should thank him for saving us the vet bill. But Rex isn't just a dog. He's family. He helps me remember my mom. And Officer Hutchins hurt him for no reason." There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom, except for Derek Hutchins, who sat stone-faced. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours. Guilty on all counts: animal cruelty, falsifying police reports, civil rights violations, and 3 counts related to other incidents that had been added to the indictment. Derek Hutchins was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. But James Mercer wasn't done. The convictions were just the beginning. Using his platform and the national attention the case had received, James pushed for comprehensive police reform in Oak Ridge and beyond. The Oak Ridge Police Department was placed under federal oversight. A new police chief was hired from outside the department, a reformer with a track record of rooting out corruption. Body cameras became mandatory for all officers. An independent civilian oversight board was established to investigate complaints. Use of force policies were completely rewritten. And in the state legislature, Rex's law was passed, making it a felony for police officers to unnecessarily kill animals and requiring specific training in animal encounters. James testified before Congress about police accountability and the need for national standards. He became an advocate, working with civil rights organizations to help other victims of police misconduct find justice. But more than any of that, he became a symbol, a reminder that corruption can be defeated, that justice is worth fighting for, that one person, armed with courage and determination, can make a difference. 18 months after Rex was shot, the city of Oak Ridge settled James's federal lawsuit for $2.3 million. James donated every penny to organizations fighting police corruption and supporting victims of police misconduct. "I didn't do this for money," he told Sandra Willis in a follow-up interview. "I did it for justice, for my daughter, for Rex, for everyone who's been hurt by people who abuse their power." Sophie struggled after the incident. She had nightmares. She was afraid of police officers. She saw a therapist twice a week. But slowly, with time and support and Rex's constant companionship, she healed. She started a club at her school called Rex's Warriors, where kids learned about standing up against bullying and injustice. On her 12th birthday, Sophie announced what she wanted to be when she grew up, a civil rights attorney. James had never been more proud. Rex, the retired police K-9 who'd survived being shot protecting Sophie, became famous. He was invited to visit schools, hospitals, and veteran centers. Children's books were written about him. He received honorary awards from animal welfare organizations. But more than the fame, Rex got what mattered most: a loving home where he could live out his days in peace, playing in the backyard, sleeping at the foot of Sophie's bed, and being loved by a little girl and her father who would never forget what he represented. He wasn't just a pet. He was a symbol of resilience, loyalty, and the fight for justice. 3 years after the incident, James stood in the backyard, watching Sophie throw a ball for Rex. The dog still limped, but he ran with joy, his tail wagging, his spirit unbroken. Marcus Rivera had stopped by for a barbecue, along with Alex Chen, Sandra Willis, and General Clayton, the team that had helped bring down the corruption. "You know what the real victory is," Marcus said, standing beside James. "It's not the convictions or the reforms or the settlement. It's that." He pointed at Sophie, who was laughing as Rex dropped the ball at her feet and barked playfully. "It's that your daughter learned that when something wrong happens, you can fight back. That justice is real. That good people don't give up. That's the lesson she'll carry for the rest of her life." James nodded, feeling emotion tighten his throat. "I spent 20 years fighting for freedom overseas. But the most important battle I ever fought was right here, in my hometown, for my daughter and our dog." That evening, after everyone had gone home and Sophie was asleep, James sat on the back porch with Rex lying at his feet. He thought about the journey, the rage he'd felt, the temptation to use his lethal skills to simply eliminate the threats to his family, and the discipline it had taken to do things the right way. "You know what the hardest part was, boy?" James said softly, scratching behind Rex's ears. "It wasn't the investigation or the trial. It was choosing to fight with the law instead of against it. It would have been so easy to take justice into my own hands. I knew how. I had the skills." Rex looked up at him with those intelligent eyes as if understanding. "But if I had, I would have become what I was fighting against, someone who puts themselves above the law. I would have taught Sophie that might makes right, and I couldn't do that to her." The real victory wasn't about revenge. It was about showing his daughter and the world that even when the system fails you, you don't abandon it. You fix it. You fight for it. You make it better. That was what heroes did, not with guns and violence, but with courage, persistence, and an unwavering commitment to what's right. James Mercer had been called one of the most lethal Delta Force commanders in history. He'd earned that reputation honestly, through skill and sacrifice in the world's most dangerous places. But his greatest act of heroism wasn't in combat. It was in choosing, day after day, to fight for justice through the very system that had failed him, and winning. 5 years after Rex was shot, Derek Hutchins sat in federal prison, his career destroyed, his reputation ruined. Mike Torres had been released after serving his time, but he'd been blacklisted from law enforcement forever. Captain Hutchins had lost his pension and faced his own criminal charges. The Oak Ridge Police Department had been transformed. Complaints of misconduct dropped by 80%. Community relations improved dramatically. The department became a model for reform, studied by law enforcement agencies across the country. And in Congress, a broader police reform bill, nicknamed the Rex and Sophie Act, was working its way through committee, proposing national standards for police conduct and accountability. James Mercer had started with one goal: getting justice for his daughter and their dog. But he'd ended up sparking a movement that changed how America thought about police accountability.